In 2010, one of the most influential games ever made was released. In what was assumed to be their dying months, Frictional Games gave us Amnesia: The Dark Descent, the spiritual successor to their excellent yet relatively unknown Penumbra series. This not only caused a revolution in the horror genre, but also acted as one of the driving forces behind an, at the time, infantile media format which has since gone on to give us household names. In 2013, The Dark Descent got a sequel, of sorts, in A Machine for Pigs. But it was a bit shit, and everyone forgot about it. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but it was a mechanically ravaged version of The Dark Descent with a less captivating story that was developed by a third party rather than Frictional themselves. So in other words, everyone forgot about it. Then, in 2015, came Soma, and somehow Frictional once again created one of the best games really ever. It was a narrative masterpiece that used many of Amnesia's core mechanics and qualities to create an immersive and horrifying world. Then, for the next 5 years, we received nothing. Well, nothing new. Well, nothing new and standalone. But now, it's here. The true sequel to Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Amnesia: Rebirth. After years of anticipation, and after building expectations that would be near impossible to surpass twice, does Rebirth deliver? No pressure. Firstly, let's address the question on everybody's mind. Does it have better dune surfing than Uayab? And the answer to that is, I'm afraid not. Once again, Uayab is the reigning champ. Thanks for watching. Okay, now that the bulk of people have disliked the video and left in a hate-fueled blood frenzy, let's actually jump in. The first thing that grabbed my attention was the intro. Gone are the days of wandering through a hallway while knee-deep in the K-hole. Instead, we're given a beautiful art piece, facial animations, humans, and a plane? I jinxed it. But you can definitely tell straight away that this is a significantly more ambitious outing for Frictional, especially when compared to their earliest games. Could have used more work on the shadows, though. But really, the visuals in the intro are wonderful, and for the most part, that carries into the rest of the game, too. The bloom and depth of field are a little much at times, which reminds me of another set of games that I can't quite remember. But anyway, there are also some reused environmental styles, but it would be hypocritical of me to complain about that without also dragging down The Dark Descent and its many, many grey hallways. One thing that is shown multiple times throughout the game is the amazing sense of scale that some of these environments provide. I mean, look at the size of that woman. That sounds strange. And look at the size of that desert. You know, that's the big one. And look at the size of that download. Very impressive stuff. But a significant amount of the game takes place in this otherworld place, and I'm just not a huge fan of how it looks. It's an unpleasant flat color with little variation, and lots of run-of-the-mill alien stuff. I preferred how it was portrayed in The Dark Descent, in that, you know, it wasn't. I mean, there was the iconic description of spiraling towers, endless deserts, and impossible geometry, as well as some minor allusions in the architecture of Brennenburg Castle itself, but I'd still take that over whatever this is. The lore in these sections is pretty cool, but that's something I'll talk about later. But my biggest takeaway about the game's visuals is the absolute, unforgiving darkness. Which is actually very tedious. I've spoken before about how overused I think darkness is in most contemporary horror games, and unfortunately that also affects this, which again reminds me of another set of games, but I can't put a name to them. Anyway, this is a great shame because The Dark Descent is one of the few games that, fittingly, uses darkness well. It's not a tool to blind the player or to confuse the player. It's meant to make you paranoid. And with mechanics such as sanity, it's meant to keep you on your toes. Hell, in some of Frictional's older games, they even give you the ability to adjust your eyes to the darkness, and doing that makes sure you're not bogged down by the tedious light management aspects of the game without sacrificing any of the horror of it. And yes, Rebirth does have the whole eyes adjusting to the darkness thing as well, but it feels significantly less helpful here. It makes the game go from, oh god, I'm blind, to, oh god, I'm blind, but wow, those are sure some acceptable floor textures. And you know, this wouldn't be so bad if not for... You know what? I feel like I'm really railing on the game. I don't mean to be all negative. It's a good game. It's just that it has big shoes to fill. Especially for someone like me that really started embracing horror because of The Dark Descent. Hell, I'd argue that The Dark Descent is the whole reason I have a channel in the first place, and therefore the friends and connections that I've made along the way, which, as cheesy as it sounds, is true. So yeah, I have high expectations, and I will hold this game to those standards. It's by no means a bad game, it's just one I'm very passionate about. Anyway, back to it. So the stupid goddamn darkness wouldn't be so bad if the game didn't open by telling you this. The game is not to be played to win. Which, by itself, is totally fine. In fact, good, I would like that. The Dark Descent said something relatively similar. But it then proceeds to provide you with one of the gamiest inventory systems I've ever encountered in a horror game. So get this. Your main inventory uses are for matches and oil, much like it was in the Dark Descent. But you can only carry a set and very small amount of each. Here are 3 reasons as to why this fact is making me start a small but elite paramilitary force. Number 1. Why would Tasi, the protagonist of the game, limit herself to only having 10 matches when they are paramount to her vision in a hostile alien world and/or harsh African desert? I understand limiting how much oil you can carry. Oil is heavy, but matches, come on Tasi, you carry much heavier stuff than that with relative ease. Number 2. Daniel from the Dark Descent could carry enough tinderboxes and oil to level Central Europe by the midpoint of the game, and Oswald from A Machine for Pigs clearly began life with enough oil inside of him to invoke a series of tragic international events. Number 3. It limits the playstyle of the player. No longer can we be hoarders or long-time strategists, we have to react immediately to our surroundings or we waste resources. So the line of, you shouldn't play to win, or whatever, is totally moot. Because here we are railroaded so hard into a specific playstyle that we aren't really given a choice on how we can play. But let's say you can tolerate the darkness one way or another. Well, remember how I briefly mentioned the sanity mechanic from the Dark Descent earlier? This game has its own equivalent. Fear. Equivalent is a painful word to use here though. So with sanity, the lower it went, the more difficult the controls would become, visuals would churn and distort as if the very walls were writhing, and you could hallucinate things. With fear, you get eye worms and jump scares. Oh, and rather than collapsing like you would with sanity, you enter a minigame which is little more than button mashing. God damn it, I hate the jump scares, I hate the eye worms, and that's a great shame, as my corporeal form is like 30% worms. Okay, okay, let's lighten the mood, go back to nice happy times. What topic is next? Oh good, bugs. I suppose I do have to discuss the absolute litany of bugs that I encountered, starting at almost the very beginning of the game. After only a few minutes of playtime, I found a cute little scorpion, and later on I found some like beetles or scarabs or something, and that's really cool. I like bugs, they're cool, bugs are neat. You know what else is neat? Tanks. You get to control a tank. You know what else is neat? Hydration, you find an oasis, that's pretty cool, but I must say Uayeb had a more interesting one, Uayeb 2, Amnesia 0, and you know what else is neat? Being alive. This game will make you appreciate that. Not in a good way. Each time you die, there is a little cinematic sequence that lasts between roughly 2 and 4 moon cycles before you're able to start playing again. It's not like the Dark Descent where you're given a sassy remark by the Shadow and then thrown back into the game. Rebirth really enjoys letting you know that you're an absolute waste of flesh each time you die, as you're forced to watch Tasi run aimlessly around. But you know, it's not meant to be played to win. In fact, death is not the only thing that clunkily takes control away from the player. 2 pretty common and vital mechanics do as well. Firstly, hiding, which is where you crouch and then you kind of crouch again. And secondly, checking on your baby. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention, the character you're playing is pregnant. Probably should have mentioned that earlier on, that's kind of a big deal. Anyway, anytime you use the hide or baby sense actions, you get locked in place and your camera movements are seriously, if not totally, restrained. Nothing immerses me quite like frequent and extremely jarring loss of control mechanics. I'm pretty sure I've seen those in some other games as well, but oh, god damn it, it's the same ones. I still can't remember what games I'm thinking about. God damn it. This might sound like a minor thing, but honestly, the consistency of player input in Penumbra and Amnesia is one of the main reasons that they were immersive. That's now replaced with this constant reminder that we, the player, are simply spectators. Which is a theme you may recognize, but not from Amnesia, mind you. Actually from Soma. In fact, there are many signs that point to this game being more of a successor to Soma than to Amnesia. And here's a short list of these signs. Number 1. NPCs. Firstly, they exist, and they play a big role. It's no longer the 2.5-man show that the prior two Amnesia games were. There's a colourful cast of characters, both friendly and aggressive, that all play major roles in the story, much like there was in Soma. Number 2, there's a huge amount of dialogue and monologuing, a large amount of that coming from the protagonist herself. Outside of notes and the intro and outro of The Dark Descent, Daniel never spoke. Simon from Soma spoke often. Number 3, the narrative is delivered in a spoon-fed way rather than being discovered like it was in The Dark Descent. I swear, I'm gonna stop bringing up The Dark Descent for a while soon, but not forever. You can't stop me. Number 4, the story is significantly more personal and dramatic, dealing more with human issues as opposed to the human/cosmic mix of the prior two. In other words, The Dark Descent, and A Machine for Pigs in some ways, was a lonely exploration of a single character, whereas Rebirth, much like Soma, was a grand horror drama where the player is mostly passive. But Rebirth does one thing that none of Frictional's other games have done before, and I think this is as good a time as any to bring back an old segment. Demystification. In fiction, and especially in horror, a tiny amount of knowledge is often the best amount of knowledge. Here's a famous example. The Blair Witch Project. In the Blair Witch Project, what is the Blair Witch? What happened to the protagonists? What the hell is that ending all about? We don't know, and that's a large part of why it's scary. Mystery. The very foundation of fear and imagination and curiosity. That is where horror thrives. Where horror fails is in the 2016 Blair Witch reboot. It takes all of those mysteries and explains them all in a dull and spectacularly mood-killing fashion. Therefore, the Blair Witch had been demystified. Amnesia Rebirth does that in spades to the lore of The Dark Descent. In The Dark Descent, you are given all of these little hints and glimpses into the alien terror that drives the plot, and in Rebirth, you're thrown in headfirst. You'll even find notes explaining the events of the first game, and you spend so much time in the alien world that it basically becomes a second home. And therefore, in my eyes, it loses its value. It shows you too much too fast. Again, I've seen that somewhere. Sorry, getting distracted. There's no longer this creeping question mark over the lore of the series. It's just another platform to tell the tale of Tasi and her friends. And I think that's a great shame. Don't demystify things. It is the bad. That's enough about the story for now. Let's move on to the gameplay. And other than the clunkiness I mentioned earlier, the gameplay overall impressed me. It was extremely reminiscent of not Amnesia nor Soma, but instead, Penumbra. There were more machine interactions, physics puzzles, greater use of space, and more emphasis on environmental interaction. It was genuinely great. It doesn't quite reach the freedom allowed in, say, Overture or Requiem, but it's a happy middle ground between many of their other games. I have no real complaints there. Good job. The stealth mechanics, however, leave a lot to be desired. Not because they're bad, but because I know they can do better. They hit all of the classic Frictional Games staples, including some great and immensely stressful chase scenes, claustrophobic stealth sections, and environmental hazards, but nothing felt new. Nothing felt improved. The monsters are just kind of fine. They're scary in all of the standard horror boogeyman ways, but they miss the unworldly charm of the iconic servants from the first Amnesia, and they lack the innovation of some of A Machine for Pigs and Soma's enemies. There's no techno-pig. Yes, scary face ET people man is scary, but where is that uncanny infantile mind of the servant grunt? Yeah, Searchlight Man is imposing, but he's no water monster. And frankly, nothing comes close to the consistently haunting howls of the servant brood. Again, that's not to say they're not scary. Rebirth has an area that easily challenges the Dark Descent's choir area in terms of pure horror, which, now that I think about it, is actually very fitting because it also takes place in a kind of torture factory. And just before we get to the ending part of this, I'm just gonna rattle off a few things I haven't written down in the script. Just some final thoughts about the game. Firstly, the level design. It really did not occur to me until very deep into the process of making this, that the level design was kind of fine. It wasn't as open as the Dark Descents. It was much more like A Machine for Pigs in that regard, and it was a lot more like Soma in that regard, which I think is just a matter of taste. There's no way of saying whether or not it's better or worse objectively. Another thing that kept popping up in my head while playing it was the comparison between the Dark Descent and Rebirth being very similar to that of Half-Life and Half-Life 2. I think a lot of people are going to prefer Rebirth over the Dark Descent, but to me, it lost a lot of the charm and a lot of the flow that the first game had. Yes, this is me saying that I prefer Half-Life 1 to Half-Life 2, and if you must know, I prefer Black Mesa to both of them. Yes, it's strange, I know, but I have my tastes and my reasons. Be gone! And one thing I haven't touched on so far is the game's audio, which, by the way, is very good. But of course it was mostly made by It was made by this man, who has done the work for The Dark Descent and also Soma, I believe. And yeah, if this man's name is attached to something, you know the audio is going to be pretty good. If not, very good. And lo and behold, it is. So yeah, the game isn't perfect, but again, I'm being intentionally harsh. I expected a lot, and it didn't fully deliver. Am I disappointed, though? No, I'm not. How the hell could they outdo themselves 3 times in a row? How could they follow up the most influential horror game of the last decade without making mistakes? And perhaps most importantly, I don't need The Dark Descent to happen again. It's taken me a long time to come to terms with this, but I can now safely say it. The Dark Descent happened. The game that defined horror to me already exists. Hell, that's why we had custom stories. If we wanted more, we could have more. Rebirth is exactly what the name suggests. It's a brave new kind of Amnesia that does its own thing. New stuff will always come around, but some things, well, some things mustn't be forgotten. Oh, wait. Oh god, I've just remembered what this game reminds me of. Jesus Christ. Amnesia Rebirth reminds me of a mix between, oh god, lust for darkness and agony. Just better than both of them, and without any of the sexploitation. Anyway, the game is fine. It's on the good side of fine, but it's just kind of fine. Anyway, talking of things that mustn't be forgotten, you can follow me on the links on screen, including Patreon, where the following people have sadly passed away or gone missing after going on an ill-fated expedition with me. Much like the game, actually, so it's a funny little coincidence, except it's not funny because people died. Here, we remember them. Firstly, the Orange Man. The Orange Man didn't die, he just kind of phased into the sand when we crashed in the desert. It was a whole thing. Kinda creepy, kinda weird, but he was good while he was around. Thanks very much. Next, there is Cthulhu135, who died unfortunately of dehydration after regaling us with many, many tales of his homeland, Orbis, but, it was actually kind of funny. He was telling so many stories that he just forgot to drink anything, so as he was talking, he just started being like, and as tragic as it is, it was entertaining. Rest in peace, buddy. Loved the stories. Next up is Dabin for Kool-Aid Jammers, who unfortunately died of blunt force trauma to the head following entirely too many dabs, which I believe were for Kool-Aid Jammers. Again, when you've crashed a plane in a desert, the last thing you want to be doing is thinking about Kool-Aid and doing a dance move from several years ago. It's in all the survival handbooks, and frankly, it's on your own head for not reading those. I hope hell has a library. Next up is Emski, who I believe also went missing. As the plane was crashing, Emski leapt out onto a huge sand dune, and being the huge fan of Uayeb that Emski is, just slid down them, building up an immense amount of speed until the horizon claimed them. I hope you found peace wherever you are, Emski. I hope you found peace. Next up are the brothers Teeps, who... Actually, I'm not gonna say anything super nice because they're the reason the plane crashed. They went up on both wings, started chewing on them. They've got teeth like some kind of twisted guinea pig megazord, and it just tore right through the fuselage and the wings and everything, and that's why we crashed. And on their heads be everyone else's deaths or disappearances. Thanks, Teepses. Classic Teeps. And finally, Ernst the Ace, who actually did survive. Yeah, funny story about that. So Ernst killed me, harvested my meat to stay alive, and then is now wearing my skin to then, you know, parade my corpse around, doing all of Ernst's evil biddings while maintaining a perfect disguise, which I find very entertaining. Classic mischievous Ernst. And with that, I believe we're brought to the very end. Actually, no, there's one more person we need to remember. Captain Lefebvre. A successful businessman that definitely did not die in a mugging gone wrong outside of a Philadelphia dive bar. Rest in peace. Thanks very much for watching. Join me next time if you like ghosts and cameos.